Welcome to the April Safety Focus, Radio Communications.
CSX engine 27.
Transportation employees use radios every day for all kinds of tasks. There are some very clear rules concerning the use of radios and radio communication. The CSX Transportation Operating Rules governing radios and their use are fully compliant with all Federal Communications Commission and Federal Railroad Administration regulations. Before using a radio, understand that communication devices are to be used only in connection with company business, to contribute to safety, or to prevent train delays and damage to equipment. The use of citizen band radios is prohibited. The engineer may designate another crew member to handle radio communications. But no matter who is making radio communications, employees must never knowingly transmit any false emergency communications, any unnecessary, irrelevant, or unidentified communication, or obscene, indecent, or profane remarks. Before transmitting by radio, you must first listen to ensure the channel is not being used. Then, use positive identification procedures to identify the station you're calling from. Next, use positive ID procedures to identify the station being called. You must always wait for an acknowledgement that uses proper ID procedures before proceeding with your transmission. To use positive identification, first identify the names or initials of the railroad. Then, identify either the base station, wayside station, or yard station you're calling from or to. To do this, state the name and location of the office or other unique designation. Or, identify the mobile radio unit you're calling from or to by A, using words that identify the precise mobile unit or the individual's title and name. By B, train number if one has been assigned, and the word engine followed by its initials and number if you are on a locomotive. C, the letters OTE followed by its initials and number if riding on-track equipment. Or D, the location of the equipment, including the track. For transmissions in connection with switching, classification, and similar operations wholly within a yard, fixed and mobile stations may use short identification, including the engine number when appropriate, after positive identification is achieved. If a radio exchange continues without substantial interruption, positive identification must be repeated every 15 minutes. When radios are used in connection with switching, backing, or pushing a train, locomotive car, or on-track equipment, the employee directing the movement must keep in constant radio contact with the employee receiving the instructions. Make certain you give clear and complete instructions. These instructions must specify the distance of the movement to be made or the sight distance available, whichever is less, in 50-foot car lengths. Instructions must also specify the position of any switches involved with the move and that the employee directing the movement is clear of all track. Unless additional instructions are received, movement must be stopped in 1/2 the specified distance. The movement must also be stopped if there is a doubt as to the meaning of the instructions or for whom the instructions are intended. Finally, when the stop is made in accordance with the previous rules, the movement will not resume again until an additional job briefing is conducted and all concerned understand the move to be made. Emergency calls must be used only to cover initial derailments, collisions, train line initiated emergencies, storms, washouts, fires, obstructions to track, or other hazardous conditions that could cause damage to property, injury to employees or the traveling public, or serious disruption of railroad operations. When necessary to transmit an emergency message, the information should be transmitted even if the sending station is unable to obtain a response. If no acknowledgement is received, necessary action must then be taken based on an assumption that the transmitted information was not received. Emergency transmission shall have priority over all other transmissions, and the channel will be kept clear of all non-emergency traffic for the duration of the emergency communication. Unless answering or aiding a station in distress, employees must not send any radio communication until they are certain that no interference will result to the station in distress. An emergency call must be preceded by the word emergency. transmitted 3 times. Emergency calls must be made immediately and must describe the nature, degree, and location of the emergency. Radio communication is also necessary to receive mandatory directives. The procedure for transmitting a mandatory directive is as follows. Step 1. The train dispatcher calls the employee or train to be addressed and states the intention to transmit a mandatory directive. Step 2. The receiving employee then states his or her title, name, and location and confirms being prepared to receive the mandatory directive. Step 3. The train dispatcher states the name of the person copying the mandatory directive. He or she then transmits the directive. Step 4. The receiving employee copies the directive in writing on the prescribed form or in the prescribed format. The employee then reads back to the train dispatcher what has been written. Step 5. The train dispatcher ensures the accuracy of the repeated directive. He then states the time and initials of the employee authorized to issue the mandatory directive. Finally, Step 6. The receiving employee records the time and initials given by the dispatcher. The receiving employee must then acknowledge the train dispatcher by repeating the information. Remember, mandatory directives must not be acted upon by anyone other than those addressed. Before acting on a mandatory directive, the conductor and engineer must each have a written copy, and they must make certain it is read and understood by all members of the crew. Mandatory directives that have been annulled, fulfilled, or canceled must be clearly marked with an X and must be retained for inspection for a period of 7 days. Finally, radio transmissions may be necessary for the proper communication of signals. We all know that employees must maintain a lookout for signals or conditions along the track affecting the movement of their train. If you're a crew member in the operating cab of an engine, then you must announce by radio the following conditions or occurrences: the name and location of each block and controlled point signal, train entry into each TWC authority from any location, train departure from each TWC authority as soon as the authority is reported clear to the train dispatcher, passenger train arrival and departure at passenger stations, the presence of cars loaded with pulpwood or poles in the train when approaching trains and equipment on adjacent tracks, train entrance into a passing siding, when stopping and each 15 minutes after being stopped on a main track or passing siding. These announcements must include the train ID, engine number, and direction of travel. In multiple track territory, the track name or number must be included in the announcement. Crew members not in the operating cab must acknowledge signal and TWC announcements. If a crew member fails to acknowledge a communication, the engineer must determine the reason at the next scheduled stop. Even when no radio is involved, clear communication is still crucial to safe operations. Employees in the operating cab of an engine must communicate the following information to each other, including the track name or number in multiple track territory. A. The name of each signal governing the movement of their train as soon as the signal aspect is clearly visible and again just before passing it. B. The name of each sign displayed in connection with TWC authority, yard limits, temporary speed restrictions, and workforces limits. Finally, C. The observance of burning fusees. These are all rules we know and follow each day, but reviewing the rules and procedures that govern our work is always a helpful tool. Clear communication between you and your coworkers is an essential component to safe operations. Only through your compliance to all operating and safety rules can we ensure the safety of all employees, our customers, and the communities we serve. Thanks for your professionalism and dedication to rules compliance. Your efforts help keep us all safe.
Requesting 3-step protection, over.